Good evening, comrades, and welcome to Online Communist Forum. Uh, this week, Jack Conrad will be giving the political report of the Provisional Central Committee of the Communist Party of Great Britain.
Well, I'm going to begin with the funeral yesterday of George Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis. According to the BBC, some 250,000 people turned up. That's besides the great and the not so good. But of course, all the way around the world, people have been expressing their condolences, their regret that this man has died. And that includes not only, as you would expect, Donald Trump, Sir Keir Starmer, atheist, um, you know, Maloney, one just carries on down the list, Modi, but also in Britain, various figures on the left. When I was writing this article, as you know, he died Monday. So I've written a double-page article for the Weekly Worker, and it was very quick, off the block was Jeremy and John. So Jeremy talked about a great loss, and John sent his condolences to his Catholic constituents and said what a great loss. This man stood up for peace, for the dispossessed, for migrants. And I was waiting for the Morning Star. I knew the Morning Star would get its act together, but I had to wait till the second day, till the Tuesday, when we had one, let me get his name right, Mark Van der Tip. And he's apparently a Belgian comrade. Had a quick look at what else he's written. And, he's an all-round China apologist. So I would guess a typical present day official communist. And from his point of view, this is a quote, the Pope Francis was a rare voice of humanity and was a moral compass that we'd lost. Now, Mark wasn't uncritical. So when it came to micro ethical issues, abortion, homosexuality, contraception, and gender, well, he was a bit on the reactionary side, but our Mark, he forgave him because at least he put things in a kind, in a sympathetic fashion. I have to say that, although I was brought up in the Church of England, I'd not come across before micro ethical issues. And I Googled it, and my AI facility came up with some sort of definition. And what it made clear, actually, and I don't know who's programmed the AI, but what it said is, hey, for Catholics, abortion is not, this is for Mark's benefit, not a micro ethical issue. It's a major ethical issue, as it should be, because of course Catholics, at least Catholic doctrine, I should say, considers abortion to be equivalent at some level of murder. It's a murder of a potential human being. It's a murder of something that's got spirit. As to the other minor questions, abortion, homosexuality, contraception, gender, I would actually say that these are major ethical issues. Either way, although he was a reactionary on this, well, God help us, on the macro ethical issues such as migration, war, climate, and poverty, then he was right on. And here you are on these questions. He provided a moral compass, apparently. According to Socialist Worker, who had a short comment on their What We Think column, apparently Pope Francis, quote unquote, opened up the Catholic Church to conversations around poverty, immigration, and LGBT plus issues. Well, I'm somewhat flummoxed on this one. I've already spoken about my Church of England upbringing, so I wouldn't call myself a student of the Bible, but I'm, vaguely familiar with the Old Testament, and the idea that the Old Testament, for example, didn't have anything to say about gay questions. I'm not sure of that, comrades. I think it did. I think it said that this is a sin, and if you went in for, lying down with the wrong sex, then you should be stoned or something equivalent of that. Ditto when it comes to poverty. The idea that it was Pope Francis that opened up the discussion in terms of leave aside the Old Testament, but let's just deal with the New Testament. No, I don't think so. Or the Catholic Church, that was born supposedly with Peter, St. Peter, the first Pope. As far as I know, again, was never brought up a Catholic, but as far as I know, this has been an enduring theme of the Catholic Church. And indeed, one of Jesus's, I'm not saying accurately quoted statements, the poor will always be with us. And what were the rich advised to do? Give everything to the poor. One of the names of the Jesus party was the poor. So this isn't a new theme. And indeed, if we look at the early church, both in conditions of, the declining Roman Empire, so the slave mode of production, or the antique mode of production, or the classic mode of production, call it what you will. If you look at feudalism, if you look at capitalism, we can put aside perhaps the social democratic settlement. But if you look at these three different modes of production that we've seen in Europe, then indeed the Catholic Church, the Church, has played a leading role when it comes to alleviating, not getting rid of, but alleviating poverty. I'm sure it's true outside London, but in my area here, I've got almshouses up the road. I've got almshouses down the road. My school, third mention, Church of England, precisely. We have Church of England schools, we have Catholic schools, and that would have applied also to hospitals. That would have applied to dishing out, food to the poor, in all three different modes of production. So there's nothing new in terms of poverty, the church having a discussion on poverty. Migration, well, is migration new? I would say no. And one of the roles of, again, the Catholic Church was to provide shelter, to look after pilgrims. So none of this is new. So I don't think actually the comrades in Socialist Worker are right when they credit Francis with novelty when it comes to the discussion around such issues. And of course, if we look at one of the distinguishing features, at least of the Catholic Church, when it comes to Franciscan monks, indeed when it comes to Jesuits, when it comes to many different orders, the church professionals, although they live in palaces and dress up with jewels and gold and all the rest of it, one of the things they have to swear to is to live a life of chastity, but also poverty. And I'm quite surprised myself that the editors of Socialist Worker don't seem to be aware of that. This isn't some sort of, esoteric knowledge of the Catholic Church. It should be common knowledge to all of us on the left, even if we have not been brought up in the Christian faith. Now, turning to the man himself, he was the eldest son, I think, of 5 children born to Italian migrants who apparently, I haven't been able to find out more details, I'm not that interested, but his parents apparently left Italy in 1929, not for economic reasons, that's what I read, but for political reasons. That could mean anything. So we have Mussolini. They weren't happy with Mussolini. That could mean anything about them politically. What we do know is with their eldest son is that he did well at school. The biographies that I've looked at quote his contemporaries saying he always came top of the class. Politically, though, what we know of him is that he was staunchly Catholic. So although apparently once he overcame his initial shyness, he loved to tango, but we're assured that nothing happened with the girls afterwards other than a nice, tender goodnight kiss. But politically, he headed towards something called Catholic Action. This is something that predates, I think, in some countries at least, the foundation of Christian democracy, Christian democratic parties. So in some countries at least, Catholic Action was actually a sponsor of Christian Democrat parties. And essentially they serve the same purpose. Although Catholic Action isn't an electoral enterprise, these organizations exist to counter socialism, to counter social democracy as it was in the late 19th century and into the 20th century. So they're there to preach the Catholic social doctrine, which purportedly upholds the rights of labor, but definitely opposes socialism, the class war. So you do get in some European countries unions established by Catholic action, again as a counter to social democratic trade unions. So he was in Catholic Action for something like 5 years. We know that he found his true vocation, though, after recovering from a severe bout of pneumonia where he nearly died. He joins the Jesuits, and he rises in the ranks. He joins the Jesuits in 1973. He rises in the ranks of the Jesuits. And I think, if I'm right, and I think I made a bit of a muddle, and I'll have to look it up in my article. I talk about him becoming the head of the Jesuits in Argentina in 79. And I think that's accurate. But what I talk about also, which I think is the muddle, is that he gets his final confirmation. He goes through his final ceremony. And I think I've got confused there with his elevation. Either way, 1979 and 1973 are, excuse me, I'm making a muddle again. It's between 73 and 79 that he's head of the Jesuit order in Argentina. Now, these dates are significant. If we look at Argentina, what any Google search will tell you, what any piece of general knowledge which you should have is Argentina in the late 19th century, early 20th century that his parents went to wasn't some sort of third world backwater. At the end of the 19th century, it was one of the richer countries on the planet. It specialized, Fray Bentos. Does anyone remember Fray Bentos, an actual place? But what it specialized in is the production of beef, and beef in particular for the British market. It was a sort of British semi-colony after the defeat of the Spanish. Either way, with the 20th century, what we saw is Argentina basically on a downward spiral. And certainly, if we look at 73, what we have there is the fall of the previous civilian military government. We have the return. Everyone on this panel, I'm sure, has heard of Peron. He returns to Argentina from his Spanish exile. He was Venezuela's version of Bonaparte. Sometimes they called him a fascist, sometimes they called him a progressive. I'm talking about the left. He returns and is elected president again. He dies within the year. His, I think, third wife, Isabel, heads the movement, is elected president. She is responsible for unleashing these AAA, the Argentine Anti-Communist Alliance death squads, not only against the rapidly growing urban and rural guerrillaists. Some of them were Trotskyists, some of them were Castroites, some of them were left Peronists, some of them were left Catholic. But no, it was against the left, against trade union leaders, against left-wing journalists, against left-wing politicians. In the end, something like 20 to 30,000 left-wingers were either killed or had disappeared. We also know, because that was going on for ages, a campaign run by women about the secret adoption of sons and daughters of murdered left-wingers given to members of the armed forces, the husbands and wives of, officer husband and wives. I think that was the general pattern. And we had, some children I never knew. I never knew my real mum. I never knew my real dad. I never knew that these people weren't my parents. Sometimes that led to acrimony. Sometimes it led to, okay, but they were nice. Either way, what we have with Francis is head of the Jesuit order in this period of counter-revolutionary terror, a claim, and I'm being serious, that he didn't know. At the same time, he says that he did help to get some people out of the country, but we also have accusations that he was actually responsible, was complicit in the kidnapping of two Jesuit priests during this period, two Jesuit priests that he'd sacked. Now, there is a myth around that in some way Francis was sympathetic to what is being called liberation theology. This is untrue. From what we know, the opposite is the case. We know that John Paul II, we know that Benedict, the 24th, if I get his number right, Cardinal Ratzinger, and Francis were not sympathetic to the Jesuit order shifting its main emphasis from saving souls to what they talked about as social justice, some sort of reordering of the society itself. They were not sympathetic to that. these two priests that he'd sacked were apparently, they weren't murdered. They turned up some 5 months, but they accused him. I think they withdrew that accusation way, way late in the day. Either way, what we know is he didn't publicly open his mouth about what was mass murder. Now, I've read in biographies that are sympathetic to Francis is that ordinary Argentinians didn't know. To me, that's as credible as saying ordinary Germans didn't notice the disappearance of Jewish neighbors. Of course they did. Did they know what was happening to them? I suspect so. I suspect so. In Argentina, did they know? Of course they must have known. Of course they must have known. You know, the disappearance of journalists, the killing of journalists, this was something that would have been at a sufficient scale that no one couldn't have noticed. So what we have with the church, with the Catholic Church, is years afterwards, they turn around and said that we committed a sin, that we were wrong not to raise our voices. Well, to make such a statement, which is what they did, is clearly an implicit, I say not an explicit, but an implicit criticism of Francis. So yeah, he might have been privately critical of the junta. More likely, actually, he was sympathetic to the anti-communism of the Viella junta, a junta that fell, you might remember, with the defeat of Argentina in, call it whatever you will, the Falklands War, the Malvinas War, which tragically, some of the organizations whose comrades were murdered by this dictatorship, some of them who'd found exile, for example, in Cuba, were queuing up outside the Venezuelan embassy to volunteer to fight, because this was viewed by some on the left, I think completely mistakenly, as some sort of anti-imperialist struggle being conducted by this vile, murdering, right-wing military dictatorship. A military dictatorship, just like the military dictatorship in neighboring Chile, that was egged on in terms of its attack on the left by one Henry Kissinger. Okay, so Pope Francis had his friends on the left. Why did he have his friends on the left? I would say simply it's testimony to the shift to the right in society. And how should you put it? Some sort of universalism of the church. And of course, I've already indicated, I think what he was interested in was recruiting, saving the souls of the poor. So of course, he raised his voice on behalf of the poor. That's true. But I've made the argument, I think that is a universal Catholic theme. And he's only a reformer, he's only a progressive in relative terms. And that is if you compare him with Benedict the 24th, still alive, but also JP2, John Paul II, the leading Catholic in Poland during the time of Solidarnosc, who was responsible for channeling into Solidarnosc something like $50 million from the United States, in their rollback of communism. The Catholic Church, I think it was, in the 60s with Vatican Council and all of that was going in for some sort of détente with communism after the years of where in Italy and in Germany, the Catholic Church had done basically what Francis had done in Argentina, and that is turn a blind eye to fascist Nazi terror against the left, but also against Jews. We shouldn't forget that the Catholic Church, social Catholicism went hand in hand with a revival of medieval anti-Semitism. The Catholic Church, couldn't forgive the French Revolution for giving political and social equal rights to Jews in France, viewed it as a sin. But the Catholic Church came to the view, I think, that maybe the Soviet Union was on the winning side and they better mend their fences. So they told, for example, the Catholic Church in China to stop praying for the overthrow of the Maoist regime. They told the Catholic Church in Cuba to stop blessing the hated blockade of the island. They went in and basically echoed the Kremlin theme of peace, opposition to nuclear weapons, and all the rest of it. And as I say, that really reached its height 89, 91. And what you had with France is really, how should I put it? I would argue more of a correction rather than some sort of radical orientation. So yeah, what did he preach? He preached for the salvation of souls, and he also preached that the rich should repent, look after the poor, and mend their wicked ways. And some on the right, so Marjorie Green Taylor, didn't like that message. Certainly, if you look up the Zionists in Israel, I don't know about elsewhere. I did have a quick look at the Israeli press, and once you read the comments, my jaw did drop somewhat with the description, of course, of this man being an anti-Semite, not in the medieval way, not in the 1930s way, but precisely because he objected to genocide and starvation and mass killing in Gaza. It shows you a somewhat loss, I think, of a moral compass when you think there's something objectionable about doing that. Anyway, they've buried him now. What I would finish by saying, of course, is that he was head of something that modeled itself on the Byzantine Empire. He was elected, that's true, but he was elected as an absolute monarch, someone who was in charge of appointing his successors if he lived long enough, and he did. So something like 80% of the cardinals that will have a vote to replace him were appointed by Francis himself. And of course, he presided not over poverty when it came to the Catholic Church, but immense wealth. So he did live, relatively speaking, a simple life. That isn't something new in the Catholic Church. Think about Francis of Assisi, think about the Franciscans. But the church itself is worth tens, hundreds of billions of dollars. We don't know its true worth because, of course, they don't publish accounts. This is just an estimate, but it is a thoroughly capitalist institution now. It's based on property. It's based on stocks and shares. It's no longer on the same basis as it was in medieval times. It's a capitalist institution, and I would argue it's a prop to the capitalist system. It's not an anti-capitalist institution, in spite of what George Galloway, what the Morning Star, maybe what Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell might have us imagine. Okay, I wanted now, as I said, to just turn to the aftermath, the sort of, how should I put it, the reactions to the UK Supreme Court judgment on the definition of a woman. Mike McNair's dealt with the legal side of it, and the argument is there that what we saw is the Supreme Court acting as a legislator. That's the point. of it. That's a dangerous development. It's happened in the past, but that's what the significance of it is. So this isn't just about, I'm saying just, this isn't just about transsexuals. There's a bigger picture here that often much commentary misses. It's also not about transphobia. It might empower transphobic people, but this is a calculated political ploy or strategy by the right. This is something that we've seen in the United States. It's something we've seen in Britain. It's what is called a wedge issue. And the right looks at the Rainbow Coalition sort of politics developed by liberals. And I'm using the word liberal in a very lowercase way. The Democrats, the Labour Party in Britain, Macron perhaps, in France. And what they say is what we need is issues that can split and divide this coalition and allow us to come to office. So, for example, if we take Rishi Sunak, if we take the Tories, this banging away, not just against migrants, but against people coming over illegally on boats. If we take Boris Johnson and the Red Wall and the question of Brexit, these are all wedge issues that they bang in to the Labour Party. Look at Boris Johnson's success when it came to the general election that saw off Jeremy Corbyn. The significance there is the loss of the Red Wall, the success of this wedge issue. Look at the success. She's about the only one that she scored in PMQs. I'm thinking about Kemi versus Sir Keir when it comes to trans rights. What do we mean? At least what do we mean? I'm not saying everybody has to mean it. What do we mean by transphobia? I would mean, at least, I mean, I'll give you a banal illustration of it. In my flat here, just outside my door, because I share it with some other people, it's the common area. And I came out working late at night and I put the light on and there's a bloody mouse running downstairs. What's my reaction? Oh, sorry, instant, instinctive reaction. My neighbor came out and said, John, what's wrong? I said, I saw a mouse. That is not what is going on with Kemi. That is not what's going on with the Supreme Court. That's not what is going on in the United States. It's not that they see a transsexual man or woman and react in some sort of instinctive way. This is a political strategy that they've mapped out, they've worked out. And therefore, when the left talks about transphobia, okay, I'm not going to make a big song and dance about it, but this is a cynical exercise. This isn't something that's heartfelt. So when the comrades in Socialist Worker talk about this isn't ignorance, I agree with them. But when they say it's just malicious, I sort of can go along with it if what we mean by malicious is that this is calculated. What they've done is pick on a minority in order to gain political traction. And what we've seen is this issue used very successfully against the SNP government in Hollywood. We've seen the effect that it had against Nicola Sturgeon. So if Nicola Sturgeon was brought down by three things, it was certainly whether to hold an illegal referendum or not. It was certainly corruption, at least of perhaps of her husband, but clearly it was also the question of gender recognition, trans rights. Who do you lock up in a man's prison? Who do you lock up in a woman's prison? And all the rest of it. And I've already illustrated it with Kemi Badenoch. And look at Keir Starmer. What is a woman? Can a woman have a penis? What was Keir's answer? I don't know when he last said this, but can a woman have a penis? Yes. Now, of course, a woman can't have a penis. He's done the 180-degree turn, and he's suffered politically. How much he suffers politically, I don't know, because of course this question isn't over with the Supreme Court judgment. It doesn't settle anything. It's just another battle in a right-wing culture war, precisely conducted by the right against liberals. And the problem with the left is that we too often and instinctively line up with the liberals and echo the liberals. And the problem is with doing that is that you choose Clinton and you get Trump. You choose Harris and you get Trump. That you are tarred with the same brush. You're part of the liberal elite. We need an independent working class approach to this and all such social as well as economic issues. We need independent working class politics, not tailism of liberalism. Well, having said that, I come to those that aren't tailing the liberals. I've already mentioned George Galloway, on the Pope. I quoted him in the paper. I haven't quoted him in this opening. Either way, when it comes to the Supreme Court, I have to say maybe I shouldn't have been shocked, but I was shocked. I'll tell you the truth. I was shocked by the joint statement unanimously passed by the Morning Stars, Communist Party Britain, and the Young Communist League, welcoming the Supreme Court judgment and viewing it as a vindication of their materialist approach to the world. Well, I'm sorry, comrades. I mean, I'm not well versed enough on this question, but at least I've heard of people who are born with an indeterminate sex, and I know that sometimes people are operated on. But I also know that some people are born with this chromosome or that chromosome, and sometimes they're born with something in the middle chromosome. I also know enough that you can give hormones to people and they develop for certain features. So yes, some things you could say are essential, but if we're talking about a materialist analysis, we aren't just talking about biology, and I've already tried to illustrate it biologically. It isn't quite as simple as that. But when it comes to society, we all know when we look at so-called primitive communism, when we look at tribal societies, when we look at non-capitalist societies, there are countless examples of people presenting themselves as a third sex, for example. So for what it's worth, I've traveled in India, reasonably, for a reasonable length of time to notice that at high class weddings, and I don't know about lower class weddings, you have this, I can't remember their names, but this third sex that comes along. To have a proper wedding, they've got to be there, sort of type idea. No one bats an eyelid about it. No one has any particular problem. They're part of society. This is the point I'm making, and that should be part of our materialist analysis. In terms of our materialist analysis, I don't know when they introduced birth certificates. I just don't know. Maybe someone will tell us. Maybe we should just Google it. Either way, what we now have to do in terms of this particular society is we tick in a form, don't we? Or when our children are born, male, female. When we have a passport, male or female. I think that's the case. Well, what would you do in India with this third lot? What would you do biologically with people who are born of an indeterminate sex? Put them in one or the other. Why can't you have some sort of people in the middle? And why can't you have people, who you recognize as changing as part of a materialist analysis? Someone who's gone under treatment for hormones, someone who's had an operation, would you simply say they're a man or a woman because they were born a boy or a girl, male or female? I don't know. I just think that a Marxist materialist analysis would embrace all of that complexity rather than reduce it to a black and white, yes, no, on, off simplicity. And certainly the idea that the Supreme Court is engaged in a materialist analysis, some sort of objective judgment. No, I would call this Supreme Court, a Tory Supreme Court. Why? Not because as an institution, it's irredeemably Tory, but simply because if we look at the recent past, these people have been appointed by Tory governments. Just like I would say that if we look at the US Supreme Court, I would have no problem in saying it's a Republican Supreme Court. I'm sure you can find a Democrat appointee, but the majority is Republican. And I think we need to view this judgment as a Tory judgment as much as it would be, if there was a Tory majority in the House of Commons, as there was for years and years, 13 years, wasn't it? Before Sir Keir and last summer. So I'm surprised and disappointed, and I mean that genuinely. I just would have thought the CPB stroke YCL would be more sophisticated, but no, they're not. So if we talk about useful idiots, they're definitely an example. How much use they are actually to the Tories and the right, I don't know. But notice when it came to Brexit, Reform and the Tory right did use useful idiots like George Galloway and the Lexiteers. George Galloway, shared a platform with Nigel, and we also had people from a similar sort of mental outlook, such as the Browrites, Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist, Leninist, also lending their votes to the Brexit party on the basis of some sort of project of socialism in one country. So I know with these people, they have a conservative social outlook, but you would have thought perhaps they weren't as stupid as that maybe they should have put some ifs and buts and what abouts and the Supreme Court and the Tory party and the right. No, they voted unanimously for it. If I was going to name an individual, and maybe it's unfair, it's Mary Davis, I would guess, that drafted their statement, but the rest voted for it. So I can't just blame one individual. Apparently is still running anti-Semitism awareness courses for the CPB, that if you look at Mary's reading list, it's just, gobsmackingly right-wing and Zionist. It's amazing. So I do read in Solidarnosc, the paper of the AWL, apparently, that the Morning Star's got a Zionism problem. Yes, it has. It's Mary Davis. It has a Zionist problem. That's true. And of course, the AWL is a pro-Zionist, pro-imperialist organization itself. Okay. I won't comment on the Socialist Party and their view of the Supreme Court judgment. Very briefly, we have covered it before. I'm not going to add much. I think we had a good article by Paul DeMarty on Just Stop Oil. They, of course, have closed, not because of their overwhelming success, but no, they've been policed into extinction. And again, you can read any standard, reasonably intelligent bourgeois journalist. Some of their activism, some of their energy will go to respectable campaigning, sort of majorityist, Caroline Lucas sort of type projects. But some of it will go towards direct action of where you don't surrender yourself straight afterwards to the police. You don't include the trial as part of your martyrdom. I have to say that looking at it from my angle, I don't think that I recognize the heroism. I recognize the self-sacrifice. I take my hat off. If I was on a jury, I would found them I would have found them innocent. Even, you know, even with all this judge stuff, you can't listen to the politics. But, you know, if you look at their targets, if you look at what they've done, they haven't added to the cause of those that want system change. They've pissed off a lot of people, and their stunts sometimes are just for the sake of it. I mean, what is the point of painting Charles Darwin's grave? Okay, publicity. What was the point of spraying Stonehenge? What was the point of the attack? Okay, on the glass of Van Gogh's sunflowers. What was the point of you know, interrupting? I don't watch it myself, but you know, the snooker at the Crucible or opera. Okay, you know, but they say all publicity is good publicity. No, not when you are pissing off motorists who often will be, you know, on a journey. I mean, I'm not just being sentimental here, to see a newborn child, to see off relatives that are dying, to get to hospital. You can talk about blue lights, but if there's just a traffic jam, you're holding people up. Commuters in the East End of London, you disrupt the train. What about people on 0-hour contracts? This isn't winning friends amongst ordinary people, in my view. It is an elitist action. And my fear is that they will be thoroughly infiltrated already by the police. And many of these actions, in my view at least, could equally have been inspired by the police, as well as the militancy and justified anger of the comrades themselves. So I would just ask them, if you want, and you're quite right, to raise the question of systems change, think about it. What do we need? We need the majority on side. And for that, we need a party. And we need a communist party. That's what I would be urging the comrades to consider. Okay, lastly, in my remaining few minutes, I just wanted to comment on the life of Peter Taaffe. You have to say he dedicated his life to socialism. He joined the left as a very young man. He was in CND, and he joined, what would it be called? The Revolutionary Socialist League, that became what I would have known them as militant, and today we know them as Spew. It was not my name, Peter. I think you chose it. Socialist Party in England and Wales. Why England and Wales? Because you had already hived off, I think, on a completely bogus basis, Scotland, to Tommy Sheridan and Alan McCombs, on the basis of what do young people think about independence, or the majority of young people favour it, so we favour it. So you landed with England and Wales by default. Either way, Militant was one of the more successful left-wing organisations in Britain, partially, definitely, by hard work. You know, one thing that you knew about the comrades in Militant, they were very serious about raising money. They were dedicated, hard-working. You look at the money that they raised, the press that they built, but also it was given a free rein, or a clear field. Again, I wasn't there, so this is something I learned after the event, if you see the point. I was aware of, when I came into politics, this was in the late 60s, that previously the Healyites, what was called the Socialist Labour League, what became the WRP, Workers' Revolutionary Party, had taken over. What was it called? The Labour Party? No, it was, yeah, the Young Socialists, get my names right. Previously, the Young Communist League had taken over the Labour League of Youth in various guises and forms. But they closed it down. So Healy's lot were closed down, and they set up, this is the Labour Party, founded the Labour Party Young Socialists. But this was in a period of where young activists were finding activity outside the Labour Party. This was in the period of CND and then crucially Vietnam. So the comrades in the Socialist Review Group, that's Tony Cliff and his comrades who became International Socialists, and then the SWP. These comrades went from the Labour Party, went from operating in the Young Socialists and the Labour Party Young Socialists. They went and they were operating openly. If you take Peter Taaffe and Ted Grant, his mentor, these comrades stayed in. And I think it was by 1970, they'd won the Labour Party Young Socialists. And that gave them, I think the guy they had, this is just from deep memory, can't remember his first name. I think his name was Bevin, the young comrade who was on the Labour Party NEC, but I might be wrong. Either way, I was aware of them because in my town, for some peculiar reasons, we had joint membership of the Young Communist League and Labour Party Young Socialists, and we weren't dominated by militant. If anything, the Labour Party Young Socialists in my town was dominated by the Young Communist League, but it was a weird town and a weird situation. Elsewhere, LPYS was dominated by militant, and it used that base to send people into the adult organization and recruit. And so I don't know what they ended up with, but they ended up with thousands of members. And certainly when they had rallies, they were impressive. You could see them at Albert Hall, and not just with a few people at the front. They could fill big venues, and they became seen as a threat as far as mainstream labourism was concerned. And we all know the history. Well, we should know the history. You know, the purge of militant took a long time, and it actually wasn't very thorough. So you saw the 5 editorial board members of militant expelled. Oh, that took about 2 years, and I think something under 200 militant comrades were expelled. What we saw, though, with militant is their success outside the Labour Party. And what I'm thinking of is Thatcher's poll tax. And it was militant that took the lead here in the No Pay campaign. And it took the lead in Scotland because Thatcher imposed the poll tax a year early in Scotland. And that produced comrades such as Tommy Sheridan, made them public figures. And that encouraged Taaffe to imagine that the future lay outside the Labour Party. And I think he was very much propelled, not by theory, but the gut instincts, by the experience of, I'll call them cadre on the ground, who are successfully leading masses of people resisting the poll tax. And in Scotland, that involved protecting people's houses from bailiffs, for example. In England and Wales, it involved people going to prison, being sent to prison by the courts for refusal to pay the poll tax, which was viewed quite rightly as retrogressive, a tax that was meant to basically punish Labour councils for helping out the undeserving poor. Either way, we saw a split in militant, and we found out about it. And this is true. We found out about it, not as in the case of the WRP, from 2 different editions of Newsline, one with a white star, one with a red star. That was the only difference you could spot. There's 2 editions of Newsline out. What the hell is that about? They must have split. What's the politics? They didn't tell you. We found out about it, and everyone else found about it, unless you were in the know, actually in the pages of The Guardian, not in the pages of Militant. They fought it out in The Guardian. And so you saw Peter Taaffe denouncing Ted Grant denouncing Peter Taaffe. Either way, Peter Taaffe went for Scottish Militant Labour, and then with Spew, Ted Grant stayed in along with Woods. And Woods and that lot were using until just a short time ago. Alan, do you remember the idea, Communist Manifesto? Don't form a working class party opposed to other working class parties. It says so from God. No, it didn't. He was talking about the Chartists. He wasn't talking about not establishing a communist party. He talked about opposed to other parties that want to have the rule of the working class. But they turned that into a dogma. That's what Militant used, and Ted Grant continued to use until his death. Alan Woods discarded it with the new RCP. Peter Taaffe discarded it with Spew. Either way, they thought this was the big time. It wasn't. I remember working with the comrades. It was very good working with them in the Socialist Alliance. This was something that they were, I think, responsible for sort of starting, but we were responsible for bringing the SWP into it. We were responsible for establishing the London Socialist Alliance. That was a serious political initiative. We had Anne McShane as the first chair of London Socialist Alliance. And when we brought in the SWP, the first vote that they took was to kick us out. We survived 50-50 split vote. Why? Because we were saying, why hasn't the SWP come in on a national basis? And I was speculating an article, can only be one explanation, and his name is Tony Cliff. And they wanted to expel me and us because we dared have such a thought. Either way, what we had with Taaffe is a similar sort of sectarian viewpoint when it came to Socialist Alliance. They hated it. Why? They could live with us. We were no problem to them. Sometimes we were a bit of a nuisance, but no, it was being in a minority. And their first experience of this is when the SWP agreed to limit their mobilization for our national conference in Rugby. But that made us, the CPGB, into the kingmakers. We won about every resolution that we wanted to win, not because of our numbers, but because we could balance off the SWP on the one side and Spew on the other. We had enough comrades there to tip it this way, tip it that way. And I do remember John Rees at the end of that Rugby conference saying, never again. And in future conferences, he mobilized his membership. And that led Peter Taaffe to go, I don't like this. And they discovered, for example, in London, the campaign against tube privatization, what we called CAT-P. And they had to support these candidates in London elections, apparently, because this was a mass movement. You must be kidding. They didn't want to stand common candidates with the SWP, us, whatever they called themselves, Socialist Resistance, or whatever they called themselves in those days, and other organizations, 6 principal organizations sponsoring Socialist Alliance. Anyway, their big idea, which I remember Clive Heemskirk announcing to us and giving me a draft of it, was Tusk. What became Tusk? And I just looked at their proposal and what do you want a new Labour Party for? We've already got one. But no, what we had with Peter is to be out of the Labour Party. You had to have the excuse that Labour Party under Blair had just become just like the US Democrats. It was a thoroughgoing bourgeois party. It was unprincipled to be in it. And therefore you need a new Labour Party. Yeah, they got the prison officers, they got the RMT. Did they get the FBU? I'm not sure. They had observed, anyway, whatever the particular status was under Matt Rack, didn't prove to be successful either in the ballot box or by winning people on board. So you had the SWP for a short time, they broke, but electorally it hasn't proved to be a success. And then you get Jeremy Corbyn. This shouldn't have happened. 2016, they apply to affiliate, the right to Jenny Formby. And my version of Spew headquarters is when they got the reply from Jenny Formby saying, thank you, Peter, but no thanks, Peter. he went, oh, thank God for that. He didn't want to be, he didn't want to affiliate, didn't want a campaign to get in, didn't want to send people in, under the radar. No, he still thought that success would lie on the outside. And I'm going to finish with this observation, and I haven't mentioned it so far. Peter was not only the head of Spew, and before that, Militant. He was previously the editor of Militant when it was founded. He was also the leading figure in the Committee for Workers International, the grantite version of the Fourth International, that he was in a majority of, both in terms of Militant, but also in the CWI. And what a tragic end that had, because what we saw with the comrades is that, having been in the Labour Party and having adopted, I would have thought, perhaps the most extreme version of economism, that had them going on about, well, women's question, that's a diversion. Just wait for socialism. Gays, you must be joking. Syria is a workers' state. Why? Because of nationalization. The Soviet Union cannot collapse. When it did collapse, we had Peter writing about the red 1990s. So their grasp on world politics, their grasp on politics was pretty poor. Either way, they come out of the Labour Party and they precisely adopt what is called identity politics. So they suddenly embrace, I would call it feminism. They suddenly embrace Black Power. They have Panther UK. All of that stuff goes. They embrace Scottish nationalism. They embraced anything that moved. And so, again, what we have with Peter Taaffe is he finds himself, I think, over the feminism question as some sort of reaction to what had been going on in the SWP, I think, over Martin Smith and the Comrade Delta question. Either way, I'm not exactly sure, because I haven't refreshed my memory. He finds himself in a minority on the executive committee of the CWI. And he just turns around, that's not acceptable, because we've got more members in Spew than you lot have got put together, and I'm overruling you. I mean, why can't you live as a minority? Why can't you fight back? Why can't you clarify? And so what we've got, I think, precisely is an example of one of these Labour dictators, I'm afraid to say. So yes, Peter did dedicate his cause to what he understood by socialism. But if he didn't get his way, in what he viewed as his property, right, then he was prepared to split it. And even if that meant splitting with a democratically elected majority internationally, that was something that he was prepared to do. He wasn't prepared to argue it through, wasn't prepared to go, okay, we'll publish our rejoinder to you. We'll publish our view on this question. So Peter Taaffe, you have to say, was a dedicated comrade. I call him a comrade. I've got no hesitation in doing that. But also represented many, personified many of the problems that we've still got on the left, that keeps us divided and keeps us ineffective. And so every step forward that the comrades made, like taking the LPYS, taking the lead in the anti-poll tax campaign, it ends up with at least taking one step back and often two steps back. And I'm going to finish with that one, Ian. Thank you. I can come in very, very briefly, because I haven't got much to say. Just on Toby, the problem I got with Toby is that you're of course quite right, and it's the point I made in my article. If you compare Francis with the previous two, he was, a raving progressive, but but then I don't want to compare him with the last two. I want to compare him with what is genuinely progressive and what is genuinely reactionary. And he was reactionary, and it's not our job. And this is what I try to point to with the trans question. Really, it's not our job to line up with the liberals. And that's how I sort of took your remarks, is that we defend Francis against Benedict or something like that, which I think is a hopeless perspective. So yeah, one is lesser evil, but a lesser evil is still evil, if I want to use that particular moral category. In terms of Paul, I mean, forgive me, but Alan Woods and Grant as great, well, I'm maybe being facetious, great theoreticians. As theoreticians, I'm somewhat skeptical about, compared with Taaffe, compared with Hannah Sell Shaw, but it's really not saying very much. I mean, I have read Grant and have been singularly unimpressed, I have to say. And I obviously agree with you on the Pope. On the question of strikes and disruption, the point I'm really making here, and you're quite right, that in the absence of the working class, then these things will happen. I.e., you'll have elitist actions. My main point is here, though, that in terms of, given their intention isn't to disrupt as such, their intention is to win the argument. Right? The intention is to win sympathy. And my assessment of the situation is they've succeeded in doing the opposite. And that's my fear. So again, just like with strikes and just like working class actions, you would weigh these things up if we were directing them. And I agree with you. It clearly isn't going to be, well, anything that disrupts ordinary people's lives, that's bad. Anything that doesn't is good. That wouldn't be the right. But are you winning the argument? Are you actually winning the argument below? And this is my criticism. And a lot of comrades in that movement would share that view. In either way, my fear is precisely that a lot of these actions could easily have been police actions, let alone what's going to come. So, okay, what do you do? They're already abandoning the stay there and get arrested. Will they abandon non-violence? Why not? If the world is at risk, when do you go in for assassination? And when do you actually become, just like the socialist revolutionaries in Russia? I mean, their guy was a police agent who was conducting assassination of Tsarist officials. So I'm not accusing it. I don't know who's a police agent. I just would suspect that there are policemen in there, policemen, police people in there. And I would be urging those comrades to choose a different path. And if we just said, oh, carry on, this is a defensible action. Yes, I've made the argument in front of a jury, in the court of public opinion, I would defend those people, but I'd criticize those tactics because I don't think that we're going to get what they want through those tactics. In other words, I'm arguing that the tactics are counterproductive. In terms of what Tina was asking for, we've got Mike's thesis. I haven't actually read it yet, but it'll be under his name. That will be published this week for general discussion, but also for amendment by members and agreement or rejection by members. So that's this week. So this edition of the paper. Polemics. I believe in sharp polemics, so I've got no particular objection to calling RS21 or SWP useful idiots in the same way. I'd have no objection to calling YCL stroke Morning Stars CPB what we want from these comrades is, I don't know, I've not read them, and I don't know what the offence being taken, but what we want is to actually engage them in real discussion. And that might mean using angular formulations. And I think we've got to get used to that on the left. And I think the worst thing that we need is yet more diplomacy of where you're not saying what you actually think. But that doesn't mean that we're against debate. We definitely want debate with comrades. But sometimes if you're in a debate, using a sharp word is a means of getting people to think, where if you used, I don't know, sugar and nice and all things like that, people wouldn't notice it. Anyway, we'll come and see about that. On Matt Rack, I don't think we should tie ourselves to we would vote for Matt Rack or this or that. I think we should defend Matt Rack on this campaign about him being an anti-Semite. He has the right. I don't know what the rules of the NAS UWT are. If he has the right to stand, he has the right to stand. But I do find it bizarre, I have to confess, that I don't know when I'm sure he's been in a classroom, but that would have been years ago. So I do find it very strange. I know he used to be a fireman. And so standing for General Secretary of the FBU, that sort of didn't surprise me whatsoever. But yeah, so this is really strange. We shouldn't be professional trade union bureaucrats. I don't know. I know he did stand when he stood for General Secretary of the FBU. He did stand on the basis of only accepting the average wage of a firefighter in London, which I think was a good thing. But what's he been a member of? The Labour Party. That's not going to exercise any discipline over him. So we're in favour of trade union officials, yeah, but subordinated to party discipline, subordinated to a party membership. That should be our approach. Pam asked, do we consider the comrades from Extinction Rebellion, from Just Stop Oil, to be political prisoners? Yes. We send them the Weekly Worker every week. I hope they read it, but we're sending it to them, of course, because we view them as political prisoners. They went into prison not for personal gain, but for the greater good. But it doesn't mean you agree with all political prisoners, but yeah, that's our approach to them. So they used to say that prison was a great place to get education, for revolutionaries. You've got plenty of time. So I hope they use it. I hope they use it well. In terms of what Ant said, well, of course it's true that what Karl Marx said X years ago might not necessarily be true. On the other hand, what he said might be true. That's absolutely the case. All we'd have to do, and this isn't now the occasion, obviously, but we'll have to choose our moment and our subject to debate through the necessity, in my view, of involving ourselves in political struggle. And that means putting forward more than an anarchist sort of view that all we need is the revolution. We need a revolution, but we need to actually make the working class into a class that's capable of carrying out a revolution. And that's done through political struggle, like raising the demand for British workers for a united Ireland, because we need our foreign policy against our bourgeoisie. Doesn't mean that that is liberation. Of course it doesn't. But that would be my argument. But that's a separate argument. And I agree with Ant on the Pope. So we're united on some things, Ant. So yeah, popes are reactionary, but we need to analyze them, and we need to analyze the difference between liberal popes and liberal approach. We don't just say that they're all the same, but that doesn't mean we line up behind one or the other or choose which one is better. They ain't anything to do with our politics.
Thank you, Jack. Next week, before next week, May the 1st, of course, is International Workers' Day, and Y Marks will be having a special meeting on why and how we are fighting for a mass communist party. That will feature Comrade Mike McNair, Kat Rylance from Prometheus, and a speaker has also been invited forward talking about socialism from a Marxist perspective. On May the 17th, there will be another mass demonstration for the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and anyone who wishes to come along and help distribute copies of Weekly Worker, please contact the office. So it's office@cpgb.org. Anyone who wishes to sign up for Y Marks, you can Google Y Marks and register for that seminar. Comrades, thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you all next week, if not before. Thank you.